Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television with me, Frank Pereira. China has strongly objected to exile Tibetan spiritual leader, the Dalai Lama, meeting President Mukherjee, stating that India has ignored its reservations. The president hosted the Dalai Lama and other Nobel Peace laureates at a conference on children's rights at Rashtrapati Bhavan on December 11th. China's foreign ministry said Beijing was strongly opposed to the meet, which would have a negative impact on relations. India, meanwhile, dismissed China's objection. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze the Dalai Lama's Rashtrapati Bhavan visit and what implications will it have. Joining me on the program today are Shiv Shankar Mukherjee, former ambassador, Pramit Chaudhuri, consulting editor of the Hindustan Times, and Mohan, Guruswamy, senior journalist. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Ambassador, I'd like to start with you, of course, and ask you what kind of implications will this have? Do you believe that the already affected relations between India and China are going to go down further?
Not at all. This is not the first time that China has protested with something to do with the Dalai Lama in India. I mean, every time the Dalai Lama is slated to visit, for instance, Arunachal Pradesh and visit the monastery in Tawang, or various other incidents in the past, China has always lodged a very, very strong protest. And we have always said that those protests are misplaced because the Dalai Lama is here as an honored guest. He is a revered religious leader, revered worldwide, and that India does not support political activity from the Dalai Lama or his adherents in India, and that's it. So this is not the first time it's happened. I'm absolutely sure that when the invitation was given to the Dalai Lama as a Nobel laureate to attend this function at Rashtrapati Bhavan, we would have factored in the fact that the Chinese protest would promptly follow. The reason is, to my mind, not very far to speak. China is obsessed with the Dalai Lama for one reason. It has managed so far to convince the world that about its one China policy. So Taiwan is recognized by just about no country, although most countries deal with it. It has also walked back in very patiently but forcefully into areas which it claimed as its own, which were under foreign rule, like Hong Kong, for instance, after 100 years. But the one area where they feel, I think, that there's still a question mark is Tibet, and they think this is because of this man called the Dalai Lama, who has attained a worldwide prominence, who poses actually no danger to Chinese sovereignty, but survives in this world, highly respected, a man of peace, and therefore Tibet remains in sort of international discourse. And that is anathema to China.
Indeed. Mr. Guruswamy, looking at what has happened so far as the Dalai Lama's visit itself is concerned, are you in agreement with what Ambassador Shiv Shankar Mukherjee said, that, China is reading too much into this whole Dalai Lama issue?
I agree.
Not from its own point of view, From its own point of view, this is extremely dangerous.
Indeed, yeah.
I entirely agree with Mr. Mukherjee on this, because the Dalai Lama has been here for 40 years and he meets our leaders regularly. He meets the Prime Minister.
But it doesn't happen too often at the Rashtrapati Bhavan.
No, well, he has been to the Rashtrapati Bhavan before, that I know. And going to the Rashtrapati Bhavan, if he's here in India, and he's a religious leader, he's a Nobel laureate, we're not supporting, at least overtly, the Tibetan movement for independence, but our people might be sympathetic towards it. Government is very neutral, ambivalent on this. So, to have him over for a cup of tea with other, there's nothing wrong. It's our business, As Chinese receive the president of the so-called Azad Kashmir Republic, they've done it at least 2 times. I know Qayyum Khan went there. And the Chinese say, we're treating him as a guest from Pakistan, So we're treating the Dalai Lama as somebody who's been here 40 years. There's a big flock of Buddhists in this country. He's an important person in the world and he's respected. So, for all the right reasons, we call him.
Indeed. Pramit, as far as Dalai Lama's visit itself is concerned to the Rashtrapati Bhavan, let's look beyond that now and let's look at Mongolia. His visit to Mongolia too drew a lot of criticism from China. The Chinese were extremely worried about that particular visit. They also cancelled a $4.2 billion deal, credit line, I think, to Mongolia. And after that, India intervened and gave them a $1 billion line of credit. So as far as Dalai Lama itself is concerned, the Chinese seem to be very perturbed by everything that he does.
Well, there is, in effect, what is happening, a battle for the Buddha that has been slowly unfolding over the past few years. And it revolves around the fact that the assumption that the Dalai Lama, given his age, is not going to be around for very much longer. So the Chinese are clearly have already got another Dalai Lama ready to run in, and they will then use all of their diplomatic and economic clout to make him the global Dalai Lama, that countries will be, we expect that the countries will be warned, this Dalai Lama is the only one that you will accept, and he's going to be ours. And if you attempt to accept any other Dalai Lama, then you're going to face sanctions and so on. So, for example, one of the accomplishments when he went to Mongolia, which is one of the reasons they're really angry, is that the Dalai Lama met I forgot the name of his title, but the highest ranking Lama in Mongolia, who basically endorsed the Dalai Lama's position that the next Dalai Lama may already be born, and he may be born outside India. So in effect endorsing that, I'm basically saying that I'm delegitimizing whatever Beijing's appointment is going to be. It's gone. The Mongolian Buddhist population goes with this Dalai Lama, and whoever he decides to will be the next Dalai Lama. The Chinese have already made it very clear. They've been holding international Buddhist conferences and saying, and their line is simple, that Buddhism in East Asia is not Indian origin, it is of Chinese origin. And that we are the heart of Buddhism in Asia, and India is just a historical accident. There's no real Buddhism left in India. And you can see this battle breaking now all across the board. You go to other countries and they say the Chinese are now pushing very heavily that Buddhism is not about India. Forget about the Indian side. This is a Chinese game, and the fundamental game is about who is going to control the next, who will have the true Dalai Lama in the future.
Indeed. Yes, Mr.
The
Guruswamy.
Chinese say that, Buddhism came from India, but was developed by China. That's the phrase they use, which is a very tricky kind of a thing. But, as far as the Dalai Lama is concerned, Chinese fear not his respect he has abroad, as the support he enjoys in Tibet. I've been to Tibet twice. And you walk on the street, you meet people, when the minute they know you're an Indian, they'll open their shirt and show you the medallion they're wearing of the Dalai Lama inside. In places where there are temples, the Tsongkhapa's temple in Kumbum, the posters of the Dalai Lama are sold openly. And the Chinese know, and the day there was a rumor in Tibet that the Dalai Lama was coming because his brother was invited to Beijing, people stood out from all reports, anecdotal reports I get, on the streets all night and for 2 days waiting for the Dalai Lama to come. That's the kind of fear they have. We went on an Indian team some time ago to Tibet, and we had dinner with the governor. N. Ram was with us, so obviously the red carpet was laid out for us. And I asked the governor, I said, what is the kind of popularity the Dalai Lama enjoys? And he says, well, about 30%. So I said, but I saw outside the Potala people doing the parikrama, rolling on their stomachs, and I said, lots of them out there. So maybe 40%. Finally, by the time we were down at dinner and finished everything, he said maybe 70%. So they themselves are very nervous of this. And so, the Chinese fear that more, because the minute Beijing shows signs of weakening, and it has to inevitably, you can't hold a large empire like that, for long, and there would be a Tibetan resurgence again. This happened throughout history, last 400-500 years. After all, the Tibetans kicked the Chinese out in 1913.
Yes.
And they went out through Darjeeling, and they came back in 51. So this has been happening all along, and history has a way of repeating itself and correcting itself.
And another thing to keep in mind is that Tibetan Buddhism has been spreading among the Han Chinese. And in fact, one of Dalai Lama's own, I've forgotten one of his aides, actually publicly said that given that almost 30 to 40% of the people who show up in the Dharamshala are Han Chinese followers of the Dalai Lama. And he says we may actually have a situation that in Tibetan Buddhist adherents, there may be more Han Chinese than there are Tibetans. And this includes, incidentally, Xi Jinping's own mother, who has
Interesting.
said that she will be buried with Tibetan Buddhist rites. And he has said publicly that her wish will be fulfilled. He will actually bury his own mother with Tibetan Buddhist monks handling the rites.
So the
of
mood
his
in
death.
China is changing.
Well, it's spreading. The Tibetan Buddhism is in many ways part of Sinic culture. It's deeply embedded there. It has been for many centuries. And so is Buddhism. So it is natural that at a time in China, given normal urban stress and so on, you're seeing a religious revival. Christianity is also spreading. But Tibetan Buddhism obviously has a political element which unnerves the Chinese leadership much more than, let's say, the Roman Catholic Church fighting with the Pope or something very far away. And so for them, this is not just an issue of, as you said, external relations, but also a question of their own ability to maintain
Sure.
internal control in China.
Sure. Yes, Ambassador, you want to make a
Well,
point?
just to support what my co-panelist said, I mean, when he mentioned about the Chinese attempts to co-opt Buddhism as part of their strategy to undermine or eliminate the influence that the Dalai Lama has, I mean, he has become the focus of all this business. And if you remember, I mean, this is a country that is totally, completely dominated by the Chinese Communist Party, which rejects religion.
Yeah.
And yet they are supporting, all kinds of methods in China and abroad to tell the world that Buddhism is is more Chinese than anything else, and so this interloper called the Dalai Lama should be shunned, and therefore they call him a splittist. I mean, if you remember, when Prime Minister Modi visited China, the part of the program was his visit to the Buddhist monastery.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that happens with other heads of state and government. And to complete that story about Chinese paranoia about Tibet and therefore the Dalai Lama, which represents all that they are paranoid about, you're talking of this meeting of Nobel laureates in Rashtrapati Bhavan. Norway gave a Chinese dissident, a major Chinese dissident, the Nobel Peace Prize 6 years ago, and the Chinese went so far as to actually break off relations, almost formally, but they froze relations. Just yesterday, in an act, I think, of complete humiliation, the Norwegian minister, was it the Prime Minister or the Foreign Minister, I forget which, just yesterday, I think, goes to Beijing, and a joint statement is issued, which is an utterly humiliating climb down by Norway, where they where they say they completely recognize and the One China policy, and that in future all actions of theirs will take into account Chinese sensibilities. So you can imagine the kind of pressure that would have been brought to bear on a nation that really does not pose any strategic threat to that country, except for that Dalai Lama factor. They have screamed from the housetops and prevented a meeting with Barack Obama. They put South Africa on the mat when there was, a conference where the Dalai Lama was supposed to be invited. They keep a hawk eye on the movements of this man of peace or this priest, because, as I said, I think they do not want in any way Tibet to continue as an international discourse. They've sorted out everything else. They're barging into the South China Sea in the face of international arbitration that says, get out of there, it's not yours. And yet, so Tibet is to them something that needs attention, and it's represented, one of the things that needs attention is the Dalai Lama.
Mr. Guruswamy, looking at the lengths that China is willing to go and something that the ambassador himself has raised, that brings me to my first question again. What kind of implications is this really going to have between India-China relations?
I don't think it'll have any implications. Dalai Lama is here. There's a government in exile here. They've been here for...
No, but they're willing to go to any lengths to...
What lengths will
Well,
they go
they've
to?
tried it before, so I doubt it.
They go to? And I think,
it won't have any.
that equation, military equation of the 60s and all is gone now, we are not, any less of a military power.
But what continues to happen is China continues to stonewall Hafiz, the UN sanctions against Hafiz Saeed, Masood Azhar, and the likes.
Suppose we sent the Dalai Lama out of India. Would the Chinese change? Would their interests change as far as Pakistan is concerned? Here is a country whose they've given missiles, they've given nuclear technology, including opening a new plutonium plant 2 weeks ago, getting it going, So, there's a certain irrevocable pursuit of a certain goal in Chinese foreign policy. We must recognize that also, while we don't have to go and kick their shins every now and then. But, we also have to watch out for how they behave. We can't let them behave like the way they behaved with Norway, India is too big a country for that, you know. We are as old a civilization as they are, you know, we're as big a country as they are. So, you know, why bother too much about this? We do what interests us and what satisfies our people. You think you can ask the Dalai Lama to leave India and the people of India will keep quiet? He enjoys lots of support and respect out here among the elite and among the common people, because we respect, we are a tradition of getting refugees in this country. That's what I tell the Chinese, you know. And you want us to change, we won't change. For you, to keep you happy, you know, that's not worth it. And the Chinese, I think, economically will lose with, as far as the Indian market is concerned. We have a $40 billion trade deficit with them. And you're looking at the world's biggest middle class coming. The Chinese can't sell goods here. They hurt themselves. And
Yes.
so they need us more in the next coming decades than we need them. So, you know, I think this will play out. But the Chinese have reserved the right to, you know, the golden urn selection, where the three names are kept there and they pull out one name. See, that is our right. So clearly there's going to be trouble. And clearly there could be, you know, I've been in a scenario of exercise where Dalai Lama is born near Tawang, and the Dalai Lama born near Amdo. So,
Yes.
you know, and that is the, so, you know, each one is trying to push the other up, and so all that will take place. But more than Buddhism, or Tibetan Buddhism, there's an issue of Tibetan nationalism. They see themselves as a nation, an independent nation with a long history. It's very little different from Xinjiang. Xinjiang is based on religion. But Tibetan nationalism is not based on religion. It's based on the Tibetan way of life and an identity they have. After all, these people even had conquered Beijing in the past, and, you know, and had gone to Xi'an and all those places. So it's not easy to destroy that memory.
Indeed, indeed. You know, there is definitely a soft message to China in all of this, isn't it, Pramit? Because let's go back, you know, a few months, and you know, even the U.S. ambassador to India visited Arunachal Pradesh. That was not taken too very well by the Chinese. So these are soft messages being sent China's way.
I think when you talk to the government, I think it's pretty clear. When Xi Jinping visited, when Modi and Xi had their first summit, there was an expectation that there would be some turnaround in the relationship, because Xi had signaled that he wanted to have, as Mohan has mentioned, access to the Indian market, and he wanted a place for Chinese investment to come to India, because India has put a very tight block on Chinese cumulative FDI to India. At the time when Modi was elected, was only $900 million, which is so insignificant as to be really nothing. And so they thought they had the beginnings of a new relationship, not necessarily a very friendly one, but at least some sort of a modus vivendi would be developed. But we saw, among other things, there was a major border incident when Xi arrived, which we're now relatively clear Xi himself ordered. And subsequently, we saw a decline. Well, let's put it this way. While China has always supported Pakistan, it became much more public in its position that not only are we open in our support for Pakistan, that almost anything that India tried to accomplish in the global sphere would be seen in a zero-sum equation with Pakistan. So if you're going to join the nuclear suppliers group, if you are going to get UNSC membership, and a whole host of other smaller things, the Chinese basically said no, because Pakistan is saying that they don't want this to happen. And to some degree, China had always maintained a certain distance between, for example, the India-Pakistan-Kashmir dispute. They'd always said it's a bilateral affair. We may support Pakistan with nuclear weapons and so on, but Kashmir we're not going to directly get ourselves involved in. But increasingly over the past few years, at least when we talk to our foreign ministry, said our sense is that the Chinese are now basically not even attempting to hide this anymore. They're just basically openly saying Pakistan is a friend and you are not. Buzz off. And so the response on the Indian side has been not particularly strong, but you'll see that once again we're beginning to constrict Chinese investment is coming under a tighter scrutiny. We're becoming much more vocal, at least, in our position on the South China Sea. But the real movement has been on the Indian Ocean front, where we're deliberately, where in Sri Lanka, you saw Mahinda Rajapaksa built an entire political empire on Chinese cash. And India basically helped maneuver a coalition to try and toss him out, and then brought in the Japanese and the IMF to get rid of the $9 billion of debt that he had taken, that Rajapaksa had taken from Sri Lanka. And slowly, bit by bit, all of these little pieces. As you said, the U.S. ambassador being sent to Arunachal, To some degree, the Dalai Lama. Dalai Lama has been a constant game with us, but we've maybe publicized. But Dalai Lama's trip to Tawang was actually more, I think, more of a signal, if you wish. Nothing major. These are all small. I mean, when you talk to the Indian side, they said that the Sino-Indian relationship is stable, but it is not going anywhere forward. And one of the core issues that's very important to realize, because it's one that the Chinese can keep insisting on, even at the highest level, is the question of the China-Pakistan economic corridor, which India said, we're not going to stop, we can't stop, but we will not endorse. And the Chinese, for some reason, are determined, they're insisting on endorsement. And the Indian response has basically been said, well, you're giving us a hard time elsewhere. Not only will we not endorse, we'll become more actively opposed to it, at least rhetorically, by statements on Balochistan and so on, which at least I'm not so certain that we can actually do anything, but have allowed Pakistan to squeeze the Chinese more on the bill for the China-Pakistan economic corridor, saying we need more money for security purposes, and slowly raising the cost of the corridor bit by bit. So you can see that there is, I would not say a trough. There's not a trough in the relationship, but there's no forward movement, despite the fact that there had been an expectation that Xi and Modi would move forward.
Is this how it's going to be then in the near future, Ambassador, where there's no forward movement with all these irritants just in place? They're just irritants, they're nothing more than that. And, you know, Sino-Indian relations are going to be this way for at least for the time being.
Well, you know, predictions are a mug's game, but you know, he expanded on a much wider canvas of Indo-Chinese relations than what is represented just by the Dalai Lama. If you take the wider picture, given the time that you have on television, I don't see India-China relations departing too much from what it is now. It is an absolute fact that the Chinese are now not just open, but brazen about the Pakistan connection, brazen about needling India, whether it's Masood Azhar or whether it's the NSG or whether it's whatever. There's not even any attempt to present it as a kind of a fig leaf, you know, or even cover it up with diplomatic niceties or so on and so forth. They made it abundantly clear that they are with Pakistan, and if what Pakistan does is against India, well, that's okay. They are our all-weather friend. I don't see that changing at all. I think Indian diplomacy, given our size, given all sorts of factors that are relevant, will be able to maintain a stable relationship even with the outstanding disputes we have with China. It's not going to be easy. I'll just give you one example. As our trajectory of relationship grows with the United States and the strategic partnership becomes really strategic, we have a problem with Russia, for instance, which is the talk of foreign policy circles these days, about Russia warming up to Pakistan, Russian-Chinese relationship causing us to wonder about the future of this really, really good friend that, you know, that has been so close to us in the past. So it's not going to be easy, but we'll have to measure up to it. On the Dalai Lama, I can almost guarantee, well, I can guarantee that our attitude will not change. You know, after 40 years and a lot of governments and more than a dozen foreign secretaries, there are certain things on which Indian foreign policy becomes very mulish. One was the NPT. We will never sign it. I mean, in the last line of her speech, something that's become a legend in our service, when Arundhati Ghosh spoke, you know, defended India's stand in the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty and said, India will never sign this unequal treaty. Not now, not ever. And we will not. No matter what government comes into power in Delhi, I can assure you of that. On the Dalai Lama, no matter what government comes into power in Delhi, no matter how much pressure is brought to bear on China, and whatever China does to link it to the Dalai Lama's presence in India, it's not going to change. It would be too much of a come down. 2
minutes left on the program. Quick final comments from all my guests, starting with you, Mr. Guruswamy. Your final thoughts on the program.
There are two things we should remember. There are almost 2 lakh Tibetans in India, and they're going to be here as long as, you know, China is in Tibet. And there is a strong Tibetan nationalism. And for instance, you know, Chinese required them to know Mandarin before they enter the civil service. Nobody does that course. They say, you know, you want us to work in the government, we'll work with Tibetan language here. So, you know, all these things are manifesting itself, and China is really confused about how to deal with it. You know, there is that problem also is adding on to them, and they think, you know, that, you know, this could keep festering and then blow up one day. And, I wish them all the luck they have in dealing with it. I think the future doesn't look good on this, at least in the long term.
Indeed, indeed. Pramit, your final closing comments?
Yeah, there was once a poll taken of Indian and Chinese strategic leaders by the Rand Corporation of America, and they asked, basically each of them was asked, what are your number one, number two, number three biggest security concerns? The Indians, which at that point had about 12 insurgencies and separatist movements, the idea of India breaking up was like number 6 or 7 on the list. They assumed that the democratic structure of India would be able to handle all of these, ups and downs, but ultimately India's integrity not in question. China, this giant, united, very powerful state, claims that 80% of its population is one ethnic group, the Han. That was their number one fear, that the Chinese across the board believed that their country would disintegrate, that one day this would be the big threat to China. So there is a very deep entrenched fear in the Chinese that even somebody as harmless as the Dalai Lama is just, all they need to do is one chink in the armor and the system will fall apart.
Will collapse, yes.
Yeah.
All right, Ambassador, your final quick closing comments.
Well, confining myself to the topic which you raised, which was the question of the Dalai Lama, I totally agree with what he said. This is their obsession. This is their paranoia, so to speak, which explains their almost excessively aggressive behavior when it comes to questions of sovereignty, even where it is virtually clear that their claim is not based on fact or on any legal basis. Whether it's the South China Sea, whether it is the explanations that were given for Tibet and so on. This fear, which exactly as he said is absolutely paradoxical, given the fact that Chinese cohesiveness is totally different from the completely diverse nation that we have. And yet India, with all its problems and languages and religions, every religion known to man and 2 religions known only to us, and all sorts of, and a federal structure and so on, nobody seems to really get paranoid about India's breakup.
Indeed. Indeed.
There's a fascinating study to be made there, I think, about this political paranoia. I don't think it affects, perhaps it doesn't affect the whole of the Chinese population, but since it's an opaque country still in many respects, we only know the opinions of their political masters.
Indeed, and we don't know too much about what the masses really think in China. On that note, we'll have to call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Shiv, Shankar, Mukherjee, Pramit, Chaudhuri and Mohan, Guruswamy, thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. That's all the time we have. Thank you so much for watching.